My name is Alara Vance. I'm 28 years old, and for the last 7 years, I've poured every ounce of my soul into mapping the unseen corners of the universe. Last month, I stood on a stage in a scratchy wool gown, the culmination of a lifetime of work, as I officially became Dr. Alara Vance, PhD in astrophysics. It was the proudest moment of my life, but when I walked off that stage and into the crowd, my own parents, Richard and Helen, refused to hug me. Their arms stayed pinned to their sides, their smiles as thin and brittle as ice. What they didn't know, as they were giving me the cold shoulder, was that just moments later, the president of the university would not only embrace me, but he would also walk over and give a warm, familiar hug to their boss, a man they had been desperately trying to impress all day. And in that single, unexpected embrace, the universe they had so carefully constructed was about to experience its own Big Bang. If you've ever felt like you were orbiting a family that refused to see your light, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how this one crushing moment led to an explosive revelation, please hit that like button and subscribe. You're going to want to see how a secret about a powerful man changed everything. Growing up, I was the quiet planet in a solar system that revolved around a blazing sun. My older sister, Chloe, she was, and is, everything my parents valued. While I was fascinated by the chaotic beauty of nebulae and the silent language of constellations, Chloe was mastering the art of conventional success. She was the debate team captain, the prom queen, the one who went to a prestigious law school and married a surgeon named Mark. Her life was a checklist of achievements my parents could proudly display at dinner parties, each one another jewel in the crown they had crafted for her. My achievements, on the other hand, were treated like strange, dusty artifacts from a world they didn't understand and had no interest in visiting. I wasn't a source of pride. I was a source of confusion, a strange variable in their perfectly balanced equation of a family. The pattern of this celestial imbalance was set early, etched into the foundational memories of my childhood. I remember being 10 years old, my world consumed by a single project, building a working model of stellar parallax for the state science fair. For 3 solid months, our garage was my laboratory. I saved my allowance for weeks to buy specialty lenses. I learned basic coding from library books to create a small program that would calculate the angular shift. The final model was a beautiful, clunky thing of wood, wires, and focused light. And when it worked, when I could demonstrate how we measure the distance to the stars, it felt like I was holding a piece of the universe in my hands. I won first place. I remember the weight of the heavy blue ribbon and the gleaming gold plaque. The award ceremony was on the same night as one of Chloe's piano recitals. She was playing a simple 3-minute rendition of Fur Elise, a piece she'd learned in a few weeks. My parents' priorities were never in question. They dropped me off at the cavernous school auditorium for the science fair, their eyes already distant. "We'll be back as soon as we can," my mother said, patting my head with the same distracted air one might give a pet. They stayed just long enough to see a photo of me with the judges, a forced, tight smile on my father's face, and then they were gone. "We can't be late for Chloe's big night," my mother whispered, hustling my father out a side door before the closing remarks had even begun. I sat alone in the front row, clutching my plaque, listening to the keynote speaker talk about the importance of nurturing young scientific minds, feeling a cold, hollow ache in my chest. Weeks later, I found my first-place trophy, not on the mantelpiece, but tucked away in a dusty storage box in the attic, nestled between old holiday decorations. In its place, taking center stage above the fireplace, was a new, professionally framed photograph of Chloe in her recital dress, bowing gracefully next to a grand piano. This dynamic became the background radiation of my life, a constant, low-level hum of being less than. When it came time for college, the disparity became starkly financial. Chloe's acceptance into an Ivy League law school was cause for a grand celebration. My parents liquidated a portion of their investments, writing a check for her tuition that was larger than my father's annual salary at the time. It was, in their words, an essential investment in her future, in the family's legacy. There was no discussion, no hesitation. When I was accepted into one of the top astrophysics programs in the country a year later, the reaction was vastly different. There was no celebration. Instead, my father sat me down at the dining room table with a meticulously prepared spreadsheet. "We've looked at the numbers, Ilara," he'd said, his tone the same one he used for business negotiations. "A degree in that doesn't have a clear or immediate return on investment. It's a passion project, not a career path." He pushed the spreadsheet across the table. "We believe it's important for you to have some skin in the game. You'll need to apply for scholarships and take out loans. It will build character." So I did. I built character until I was worn down to the bone. I worked 3 part-time jobs simultaneously while maintaining a 4 gigapascals. I was a barista at the campus coffee shop from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., smelling of burnt coffee during my morning quantum mechanics lecture. I tutored undergraduates in calculus in the afternoons, and I worked the late shift at the university library, shelving books in the silent, cavernous stacks until midnight. I wrote hundreds of essays for scholarship applications, begging strangers for grants to fund my dream. My diet consisted primarily of instant noodles and free crackers from the student lounge. All the while, Chloe was sending glossy postcards from her university-funded study abroad trip in Florence. One arrived with a picture of the Duomo. On the back, she wrote, "The art here is divine. Mom and Dad sent extra money so I could take a weekend trip to Tuscany. You should try to see it someday, if your stars ever align." Haha. It felt less like a joke and more like a deliberate, cruel jab. I pinned the postcard to my corkboard as a reminder not of Tuscany, but of the vast, unbridgeable distance between my sister's life and my own. Despite it all, despite the financial strain and the emotional neglect, I held on to a sliver of hope, a scientifically improbable belief that one day I could generate enough light to be seen. I thought that earning my doctorate, the highest academic achievement possible, would finally be something they couldn't dismiss or hide in the attic. It was a tangible, undeniable accomplishment. It was a title, doctor. A title that commanded a certain respect, even in their world of corporate law and surgery. Surely that would be enough. Surely for one day they could be proud of their other daughter. I was naive to think a piece of paper could heal a lifetime of wounds. I had no idea that on my biggest day, their ambition wouldn't just overshadow me, it would try to erase me completely, because my moment in the sun was an inconvenient shadow on their own ambitious plans. Graduation day dawned bright and painfully clear. A perfect, cloudless blue sky that felt like a good omen. A cosmic wink from the universe I had dedicated my life to understanding. I remember the specific feeling of the heavy doctoral robes on my shoulders, the rich, dark blue velvet of the hood signifying a doctor of philosophy. It wasn't a costume. It felt like a mantle, a weight that was both earned and deeply satisfying. 7 years of sleepless nights, of wrestling with concepts that stretched the very limits of human understanding, of moments of crippling self-doubt in front of a whiteboard filled with incomprehensible equations, and moments of exhilarating discovery when those equations suddenly resolved into a beautiful, elegant truth. It all came down to this day. My best friend Sarah, a brilliant biologist I'd met in a graduate seminar, helped me adjust my hood in my tiny, cluttered apartment. Her eyes were shining with a genuine, unadulterated pride that I craved from my own family. "You did it, Dr. Vance," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She straightened the tassel on my cap. "You actually, literally reached for the stars. And you caught a few." We hugged, a real hug, full of warmth and shared history. For a moment, her belief in me was enough to fuel my own. My parents and Chloe had driven down for the ceremony, arriving at my apartment that morning with the enthusiasm of people attending a mandatory HR seminar. Their presence was less a celebration and more a perfunctory appearance. My mother, Helen, immediately began complaining about the traffic from the suburbs. "It took us 2 hours, Ilara. You'd think for a major university, they'd have better traffic flow." My father, Richard, checked his expensive watch, his brow furrowed as he calculated how quickly they could leave after the ceremony to beat the dinner rush. Chloe, ever the polished lawyer, surveyed my bustling, slightly chaotic campus with an air of detached amusement, as if observing a quaint local custom. She was wearing a chic designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, a stark contrast to my simple, functional world. There was no excitement in their eyes, no sense of shared triumph. They didn't ask to see my diploma or ask about the ceremony's schedule. They were there to check a box, to perform the role of supportive family for the few hours required. The air was thick with their impatience. During the long, formal ceremony, as I sat on the hard wooden chair amongst my peers, I felt a profound sense of belonging I had never felt with my own family. These were my people dreamers, thinkers, and explorers who understood the relentless, often lonely pull of curiosity. We had all sacrificed, all struggled, all felt the sublime joy of a problem solved. When the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences called my name, Dr. Ilara Vance, he paused. He added a special, unscripted mention of my dissertation on using gravitational lensing to map dark matter, citing it as a significant and groundbreaking contribution to the field, one that will undoubtedly shape our understanding for years to come. A ripple of genuine applause went through the faculty section. My heart swelled. I risked a glance towards my family, who were seated in the third row. My father was looking down, scrolling through his phone. My mother was whispering something to Chloe, gesturing towards the exit. They hadn't heard. Or if they had, the words had simply washed over them, meaningless academic jargon. A familiar, cold pang of disappointment settled in my chest, a feeling as constant as the cosmic microwave background radiation. But I pushed it away. The final moment, the moment I walked across that grand stage, shook the dean's hand, and received the heavy, leather-bound folder containing my diploma, was for me. It was for the 10-year-old girl in the garage, for the exhausted undergraduate shelving books at midnight. It was for me. The ceremony ended, and a joyful chaos erupted as thousands of graduates and their families flooded the main university lawn, a sea of black robes and beaming faces. It was a cacophony of cheers, laughter, and popping champagne corks. I spotted my family standing near a large oak tree, looking distinctly out of place and deeply impatient. My father had his hands in his pockets, rocking back on his heels. My mother was fanning herself with the program, her face a mask of weary tolerance. I took a deep breath, the heavy paper of my diploma feeling solid and real in my hand. This was it, the culmination. I had done it. No matter our history, no matter their indifference, this was a moment for family, a moment for pride, a moment for a simple, validating hug. Hope, I've learned, is a stubborn, irrational thing. It flickers even in the coldest of vacuums, against all evidence to the contrary. I started walking towards them, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time that day, feeling the warmth of the late spring sun on my new doctoral robes. But as I got closer, the look on their faces, a mixture of irritation and social anxiety, told me everything I needed to know. The cold front was moving in, and a storm was about to break. As I navigated the joyful chaos of the lawn, my smile felt increasingly fragile, like a thin sheet of ice stretched over deep, cold water. I finally reached the oak tree where my family stood, an isolated island of impatience in a sea of celebration. "I did it," I said, my voice filled with a hope I couldn't quite extinguish, holding up the diploma folder as if it were a peace offering. My father clapped me on the shoulder once, a stiff, formal gesture that conveyed no warmth. "Good job, Ilara. Very impressive." He didn't make eye contact. His gaze was already scanning the crowd, flitting over faces as if looking for someone more important, a better networking opportunity. It was the same dismissive pat on the head from the science fair, just scaled up for a doctoral degree. My mother offered a tight, bloodless smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, wonderful, dear. We're so pleased for you. The ceremony was very long, wasn't it?" Her focus immediately shifted. "Chloe, did you remember to validate our parking ticket? I don't want to get stuck in that garage." Chloe, who had been engrossed in her phone, finally looked up, her expression one of profound boredom. "It's handled, Mom," she sighed, as if the request was a monumental inconvenience. She gave me a cursory once-over, her eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on my doctoral hood before dismissing it. "Congrats, I guess. So, what's the plan for dinner? Mark and I have an early start tomorrow for our trip to the Hamptons. We can't do a late night." The casual indifference was like a physical blow. They hadn't just missed the dean's praise, they had missed the entire point of the day. I stood there, clutching my diploma, the symbol of 7 years of my life, and my heart began its slow, painful sink. I was hoping for a hug, I said, the words coming out as a near whisper, feeling childish and needy the moment they left my lips. The request hung in the air, suddenly feeling foolish and desperate. My mother's smile tightened until her lips were a thin, white line. "Oh, Alara, don't be dramatic," she chided, her voice a sharp hiss. "You'll wrinkle my silk dress, and this gown of yours looks quite coarse." She took a half step back, creating a physical barrier between us. My father, seeing her retreat, simply crossed his arms over his chest, a definitive, unbreachable wall. They refused to hug me. In the middle of the crowded lawn, surrounded by families embracing, crying, and cheering, my own parents stood like statues of ice, their message as clear and cold as the void between galaxies. "You are not worth the effort. You are not worth the wrinkle in a dress." The humiliation was a physical sensation, a hot, prickling flush that crawled up my neck and burned behind my eyes. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, though in reality, no one was likely paying attention. In that moment, I had never felt more alone. The celebration dinner that followed was a masterclass in their particular brand of emotional neglect. They chose a noisy, generic chain restaurant off the highway because, as my father announced, it was on the way back and we don't have time for anything complicated. We were seated in a sticky vinyl booth under a flickering fluorescent light. Throughout the meal, the conversation revolved entirely around Chloe, a familiar and well-rehearsed performance. They discussed her upcoming vacation to the Hamptons in exhaustive detail. The rental house, the dinner reservations, the friends she would be seeing. They moved on to a difficult case she was working on, listening with rapt attention as she used complex legal jargon, nodding as if they understood every word. They spent 20 minutes dissecting the renovation plans for her kitchen, debating the merits of quartz versus granite countertops. They asked me no questions about my future. Nothing about the postdoctoral fellowship I had been awarded at a world-renowned observatory. Nothing about what it felt like to have finally, definitively, achieved my life's goal. When I tried to gently steer the conversation, to share a piece of my world, I was immediately shut down. "I'm really excited about the research project in Arizona," I started. "We'll be using the observatory's new spectrograph to—" My father cut me off, holding up a hand. Yes, the PhD is a great accomplishment," he said, waving his fork dismissively. "But Chloe's work in corporate law, that's the real world, Alara. She's making a tangible impact, closing multi-million-dollar deals. That's success you can measure." The implication was as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. My life's work was intangible, a fantasy, not real success. I felt myself shrinking in my seat, the joy of the day being systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece. Later, my father doubled down with a pointed comment about my finances. "Well," he said, leaning back with a sigh of satisfaction after paying the bill, "at least with this doctorate, you can finally get a real job and start paying off those student loans. It's about time you stood on your own 2 feet." He said it with a magnanimous air, completely ignoring the fact that my prestigious fellowship came with a generous stipend and that I had won scholarships that covered the vast majority of my tuition, a fact he knew, because I had proudly sent him the award letters. It was a deliberate jab, a calculated move to remind me of my perceived status as a financial burden compared to their blue-chip investment, Chloe. Later that evening, exhausted and emotionally bruised, I was sitting on the edge of the guest bed at their house, scrolling numbly through my phone. A text from Sarah came through. We had taken a quick selfie together before the ceremony, our faces beaming. She had sent it to me with the caption, "Look at this absolute superstar. Dr. Vance in the house. So unbelievably proud of you, my friend. The universe is lucky to have you." Seeing her genuine excitement, her unconditional pride, was like a sip of water after days in a desert. It highlighted the profound, arid emptiness of my family's reaction. A few minutes later, another text popped up. It was from Dr. Eris Thorne, the president of the university. He had been my academic advisor before his promotion and had become a significant mentor in my life. The text was surprisingly long and thoughtful. It read, "Alara, I was so immensely proud to see you on that stage today. Your dissertation is a triumph of persistence and intellect. You have a brilliant future ahead, and the entire department is celebrating your success. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything at all as you transition to Lowell. My sincerest congratulations, Aris." Reading his words, I felt hot tears welling in my eyes. The validation from someone I respected so deeply was both a profound comfort and a painful reminder of what I was missing from the people who were supposed to love me most. Dr. Thorne, a man running an entire university, had taken the time out of his impossibly busy schedule to send a personal, meaningful message. My parents, who were sitting in the living room downstairs, had barely managed a full sentence of congratulations between them. It was my friend Sarah who finally put a name to the dynamic I had been living with my whole life. I called her later that night, my voice cracking as I recounted the events of the day, from the refused hug to the dismissive dinner. She listened patiently, making quiet sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she was silent for a moment before saying something that struck me with the force of a revelation. "Alara," she said gently, but with a firm clarity, "this isn't just them being thoughtless or self-absorbed. They treat your success as a threat to Chloe's status as the golden child. They have to minimize your achievements to keep their family narrative intact. They don't celebrate you, they manage you. It's not a healthy environment. Manage you." The phrase echoed in my head, unlocking years of confusion. She was right. They weren't just indifferent. They were actively working to keep me in my designated box. They couldn't share the spotlight. They had to ensure Chloe's remained the brightest. As I was about to hang up, my voice thick with unshed tears, I heard my parents' voices from the hallway. They were on the phone with Chloe, who had already left for her own home. Their tones, now that I was out of the room, were animated and warm, filled with laughter. "Yes, it was a lovely little ceremony," my mother was saying, her voice dripping with a condescension that made my stomach clench. "Very academic. So many boring speeches. Anyway, tell us more about the fabric samples for the new sofas. Are you going with the velvet or the linen?" My father laughed, a booming sound that felt like a betrayal. Her little hobby finally paid off, I suppose. At least she can hang it on her wall. "Now, about that reservation in Florence for our trip. Did you manage to get us into that place you love?" They were mocking me, mocking my life's work. The culmination of my dreams was just a lovely little ceremony, a little hobby, and in that moment I realized this wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate cruelty, a conscious, malicious effort to diminish me to ensure their perfect solar system remained undisturbed. The fragile hope I had clung to all day shattered into a million pieces of cold, hard dust, leaving behind a chilling, terrifying clarity. I had to get out. The morning after my graduation, the atmosphere in my parents' house was thick with a tense, unspoken energy. They were moving with a hurried, electric purpose that had been entirely absent the day before. The dreary obligation of my little ceremony was over, and now they could focus on what truly mattered. I came downstairs to find my mother on the phone, her voice bright and animated, confirming a reservation at a high-end golf club. Yes, a tea time for 3 at 1 p.m. For Richard Vance. He'll be joined by Mr. Jonathan Sterling. Yes, Sterling. Thank you. She hung up, her face flushed with excitement. My father was in the dining room, meticulously polishing his best pair of Italian leather shoes, laying out a freshly pressed polo shirt and expensive slacks. It was clear they had important plans that had nothing to do with me or my achievement. I decided to make one last attempt, to have a real conversation about the wound they had inflicted the day before. I walked into the dining room, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "I was really hurt yesterday," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "It would have meant a lot to me to feel your support, to get a hug." My father didn't even look up from buffing a perfect shine onto the toe of his shoe. "Ilara, we were there. We sat through the entire 3-hour ordeal. We bought you dinner. We have a very important engagement today, and we simply don't have time for this melodrama. The word ordeal landed like a punch to the gut. My graduation, my triumph, was an ordeal they had to endure. "What is this important engagement?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I already suspected the answer, but I needed to hear it from them. My mother bustled into the room, holding up 2 different ties for my father to choose from. She glanced at me, her expression a mixture of annoyance and barely concealed glee. Richard's boss, Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, was at the graduation yesterday. His nephew was graduating from the business school. Your father managed to speak with him after the ceremony, and he invited him for a round of golf. This could be huge for your father's career, a potential promotion to the executive board. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father hadn't been scanning the crowd for an exit. He had been hunting for his boss. That was his priority. And then, my mother delivered the final, crushing blow. A statement so callous, so utterly devoid of maternal instinct, that it would echo in my mind for years to come. "Frankly," she continued, her voice sharp and accusatory as she straightened my father's collar, "your little emotional display on the lawn was very unhelpful. We saw Mr. Sterling watching from a distance. The last thing we needed was for him to see us dealing with a tearful, needy daughter right when your father was trying to make a good impression. It looks unprofessional. It reflects poorly on the family." I stared at her, speechless. The world tilted on its axis and all the air was sucked out of the room. It wasn't just that they didn't care about my achievement. It wasn't just that they were indifferent. It was that my achievement, my moment, my feelings, were an inconvenience to their social climbing. My desire for a simple hug wasn't a natural expression of love between a daughter and her parents. It was an emotional display, a liability, a professional misstep. My graduation wasn't a celebration of my life's work. It was a networking opportunity for them, and I had almost ruined it by having human emotions. In that instant, 28 years of suppressed pain, of being minimized, of being the second-choice daughter, of having my passions dismissed as hobbies, coalesced into a single, blinding moment of clarity. It was the emotional equivalent of watching a supernova. A lifetime of a dying star's energy released in one brilliant, destructive, and illuminating flash. I saw the truth of my situation with a precision that was almost mathematical. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a prop, a supporting character. And on that day, I was a poorly behaving prop that had threatened to ruin their big show. I thought about the years of work, the endless nights in the library, the sacrifices, the relentless pursuit of knowledge that had led me to that stage. I had done it all secretly, hoping for a crumb of their approval, a whisper of their pride. And here they were, telling me that the most authentic human part of me, the part that wanted to connect with my family in a moment of shared triumph, was a professional liability. A strange, preternatural calm washed over me. The desperate, aching need for their validation, a constant hum in the background of my life since I was a child, suddenly went silent. The fight was over. You can't win a game you finally realize you should never have been playing. "I see," I said, my voice eerily quiet, stripped of all emotion. They both stopped what they were doing, surprised by my lack of argument, my lack of tears. The calm was more unnerving to them than any outburst would have been. "Thank you for clarifying your priorities. It's very helpful to know where I stand." I turned and walked back upstairs to my childhood bedroom, the one that still had glow in the dark stars on the ceiling and posters of the Andromeda Galaxy on the wall. I closed the door and leaned against it, my body trembling not with sadness, but with a terrifying, liberating rage. They thought they were the only ones with a strategy. They thought Mr. Sterling was their connection, their prize. They had no idea about the universe of secrets that connected me to that man. They had just tried to use my graduation to climb their corporate ladder, but they were about to find out that some ladders are built over black holes. The Vorkebe Mart wasn't something I had sought out. It was a truth I had been entrusted with, a product of genuine connection and mentorship concepts my parents, with their purely transactional view of relationships, could never truly comprehend. My relationship with Dr. Eris Thorne, the university president, went far beyond that of a student and a former advisor. He and his wife, Eleanor, had seen my potential when I was just a nervous undergraduate struggling through my first advanced physics course. Over the years, they had become my academic family. They invited me for holidays when they knew my own family was preoccupied with Chloe's more important social events. They read early drafts of my papers, offering insightful critiques and unwavering encouragement. They celebrated my every small success as if it were their own. Their pride, a warm, steadying presence in my often lonely academic journey. What my parents, in their self-absorbed bubble, didn't know and could never have imagined was that Dr. Thorne's connection to Mr. Jonathan Sterling was not just professional, it was deeply personal. A festering wound cloaked in decades of polite silence. Dr. Thorne and Mr. Sterling had been college roommates, an odd pairing of a quiet, brilliant physicist and a charismatic, ruthlessly ambitious business student. But the real connection, the source of Dr. Thorne's quiet, academic fury, was his late sister, Dr. Lena Thorne. Lena had been a physicist of rare genius. As a junior researcher in her late 20s, her foundational work on renewable energy storage became the basis for the Helios project, the very technology that had launched Mr. Sterling's company, Sterling Dynamics, into the stratosphere. She was the mind. He was the mouthpiece. Sterling, recognizing the commercial potential of her breakthrough, had used his business acumen to package her work, secure the patents almost entirely under his own name, and effectively erase her from the company's public history. He had pushed her out of her own discovery with a laughably small settlement and a draconian non-disclosure agreement that legally silenced her for the rest of her life. Lena Thorne, broken by the betrayal, had left academia and passed away a few years later, her name known only to a small circle of colleagues who understood the magnitude of the theft. Dr. Thorne had spent years quietly gathering evidence of this corporate injustice: emails, lab notes, testimonies from former colleagues. He knew he couldn't win a lawsuit. The NDA was ironclad. But he kept the file as a testament to his sister's stolen legacy. I knew all of this because Dr. Thorne had shared the story with me one evening in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of his sister's books. It wasn't gossip. It was a somber, cautionary tale about the brutal intersection of pure science and cutthroat commerce, a lesson he felt I needed to learn as I entered the professional world. And here was the crucial, damning detail. My father, Richard Vance, had been a junior executive at the company during that very acquisition phase. He wasn't a major player, but he was in the room. He had been part of the team that handled the smooth transition corporate speak for silencing a brilliant woman and stealing her life's work. My father knew exactly what Sterling had done. He had stood by and watched, choosing his career over his conscience. His entire professional life was built on the foundation of that ugly, silent secret. That afternoon, after the devastating confrontation with my parents, I drove to Dr. Thorne's home, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I found him in his study, a cup of tea growing cold beside him. I explained what had happened, the refused hug, the cruel dismissal of my life's work, and the final, gut-wrenching revelation that their behavior was all for the benefit of impressing the one man he despised most in the world. He listened without interruption, his expression growing darker and colder with every word. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the setting Sunday. "Alara," he said finally, his voice low and firm, laced with a controlled anger that was more intimidating than any shout. "Your parents have mistaken kindness for weakness for the last time. Your father built his career on the sidelines of a great injustice. He chose to look the other way for profit. It seems to be a recurring theme in his life." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice small, feeling like a lost child again. He turned to face me, his eyes clear and resolute. "You do not sink to their level," he stated. "You rise above it. You do not blackmail, you do not threaten, you simply illuminate. You introduce a new, massive object into their small, predictable solar system and watch how their orbits are forced to change. You show them that you are no longer a satellite. You are your own star, with your own gravity." We spent the next hour formulating a plan. It wasn't about revenge, it was about liberation. The goal wasn't to destroy my father's career, but to sever my dependence on their approval permanently and on my own terms. Dr. Thorne picked up his phone, Jonathan, he said when the call was answered, his tone perfectly cordial but with an undercurrent of steel. Eris Thorne here. I trust you're well. I was at the university graduation yesterday. A long affair, but worth it. I saw my brilliant protégée, Elara Vance, receive her doctorate in astrophysics. Yes, a remarkable mind. She's going to change the way we see the universe. I also saw your man Richard Vance there. Small world, isn't it? I'm having a small, informal get-together to celebrate Elara this Saturday. I'd love for you to stop by and meet her properly. She has some fascinating insights on legacy and intellectual property. He paused. Excellent. We'll see you then. The implication was subtle, but as powerful as a gravitational wave. Dr. Thorne was linking me, his brilliant protégé, directly to Mr. Sterling, and simultaneously reminding him of their shared, ugly history through the coded language of legacy and intellectual property. He was creating leverage. My role was simpler, but no less significant. I needed to orchestrate one final meeting with my family. I spent the next day preparing my arsenal of facts. I printed out my fellowship acceptance letter, the summary of my dissertation, and the official offer letter for my research position at the Lowell Observatory. I organized my financial documents, highlighting the scholarships that had paid my way. I was building an irrefutable case for my own independence. That evening, with a steady hand, I composed an email. Subject: an important announcement regarding my future. Dear Mom, Dad, and Chloe, I would like you to come to my apartment this Saturday at 2 p.m. There are some significant developments in my career and personal life that I need to discuss with you all in person. Please be prompt. Sincerely, Elara. There was no warmth, no pleading. It was concise, professional, and non-negotiable. I knew they would come. Their curiosity and their ingrained need to manage any situation involving me would be too strong to resist. They would walk into my tiny apartment expecting a plea for money or an emotional breakdown. They would be met with an astrophysicist who had finally learned to control her own gravity. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait. Saturday afternoon felt charged, like the moments before a total solar eclipse when the world grows quiet and holds its breath. My small apartment, usually a sanctuary of books, star charts, and the comforting hum of my computer, felt like a stage set for a final, defining act. I had arranged 2 chairs opposite my worn-out sofa, a coffee table between them holding nothing but 3 glasses of water and a single plain manila folder. I was calm, my earlier anger having cooled into a solid, clear resolve. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were an astronomer observing a distant cosmic event. I wasn't the emotional daughter seeking approval anymore. I was a scientist about to present her findings, and the data was irrefutable. They arrived precisely at 2 p.m., a united front of judgment and suspicion. My father, Richard, entered first, his posture rigid, his face set in a look of stern impatience. My mother, Helen, followed, her eyes sweeping critically over my humble apartment, cataloging its perceived flaws: the second-hand bookshelf, the faded rug. Chloe trailed behind them, exuding an air of smug superiority, as if she were a high-powered lawyer attending a deposition for a trivial case she already knew she would win. Elara, my mother began, her voice strained with a false brightness that failed to conceal her annoyance. Your email was very cryptic. Is everything all right? The subtext was as clear as day. What trouble have you gotten yourself into now, and how will it inconvenience us? Everything is better than all right, I said, my voice steady and even. I gestured for them to sit on the sofa. Please, have a seat. This won't take long. They sat, their body language a symphony of discomfort. My father tapped his fingers on his knee, a frantic rhythm that betrayed his calm facade. Chloe immediately took out her phone, a clear signal that she considered this meeting beneath her. I remained standing, a position of quiet authority. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I began. I invited you here today to thank you, I said. Their heads snapped up in unison, their expressions a mixture of confusion and suspicion. This was not the opening they had expected. I want to thank you, I continued, for the profound clarity you provided me on the morning after my graduation. My father narrowed his eyes. his patience already wearing thin. "What is this about, Alara? If you have something to say, say it. Some of us have busy schedules." "It's about your priorities," I said, my voice unwavering. "You told me, quite explicitly, that my desire for a hug, my emotional display, was unprofessional and a liability. You made it clear that your networking opportunity with your boss, Mr. Sterling, was far more important than my feelings or my life's greatest accomplishment, and for that, I truly thank you. You have finally, permanently freed me from the illusion that your approval is something I should ever seek again." "Now, that's not fair," my mother stammered, flustered and immediately on the defensive. "We were just trying to explain the pressures of the professional world. You've lived in an academic bubble. You don't understand these things. And you did a wonderful job explaining," I said, my tone coolly agreeable, steamrolling over her excuse. "Speaking of the professional world, I had the most interesting conversation with Dr. Aris Thorne the other day. He sends his regards." At the mention of the university president's name, my father sat up straighter, a flicker of alarm in his eyes. "You spoke with Dr. Thorne? About what?" "Oh, we talk often. He's been my mentor for years. A wonderful man, a man of great integrity. He was telling me all about his old college roommate, a fascinating character apparently, a man named Jonathan Sterling. It's such a small, interconnected universe, isn't it?" The color drained from my father's face. My mother looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. Chloe, for the very first time, put her phone down, her lawyer's instinct sensing a dramatic shift in the power dynamic. She was no longer bored. She was intrigued. "Dr. Thorne finds my work on gravitational lensing fascinating," I went on, my tone light and conversational, as if discussing the weather. "He thinks it has applications in various fields. He even mentioned some of the foundational research that Mr. Sterling's company was built on, a project called Helios. He said it was a tragic story, really. About his sister, a brilliant young researcher named Lena Thorne, whose work was acquired, and she was effectively written out of history." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. I turned my gaze directly to my father. "You were at Sterling Dynamics back then, weren't you, Dad? A junior executive on the team that handled that smooth transition?" The silence in the room was absolute, so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My father looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He knew. In that instant, he knew that I knew. He knew that Dr. Thorne knew. The secret he had buried for 30 years had just been quietly exhumed in my shabby little living room. Chloe, her eyes wide, looked from my pale face to our father's ashen one. Her legal mind was finally piecing it together. "What is she talking about, Dad? What Helios project?" My father couldn't speak. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. My mother looked back and forth between us, her face a canvas of dawning horror. "Don't worry," I said, my voice softening slightly, twisting the knife with a touch of pity. "I have no interest in dredging up the past. Dr. Thorne and I, we're scientists. We're interested in the future. And my future," I said, walking over to my desk and picking up the manila folder, "is what I really wanted to discuss with you." I placed the folder on the coffee table in front of them. "This," I said, sliding out the first document, "is my official appointment as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Lowell Observatory in Arizona. This," I added, placing the second paper on top, "is my new employment contract, with a salary that will allow me to live quite comfortably. And this," I finished, placing my financial statement on top of the pile, "is a summary of how I will be funding my new life, with the scholarships I won and the loans I secured, entirely on my own." I looked each of them in the eye, one by one. "My orbit is changing. Effective today, you no longer have any gravitational pull in my life. You will not be consulted on my decisions. You will not be a source of validation I seek. You will not use my life as a footnote in Chloe's story. I am moving to Arizona in 2 weeks to begin the work I was born to do." "You can't just cut us out of your life," my mother finally cried, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and panic. "I'm not cutting you out," I corrected her calmly. "I'm setting a boundary. A very, very distant one, an astronomical unit, if you will. Perhaps, one day, when you've learned that love and respect are not conditional commodities, we can re-establish contact. But until then, I need to go where my work, and I, are valued. Chloe, for once in her life, was utterly silent, her smug expression replaced by one of stunned disbelief. My father just sat there, deflated. A man whose carefully constructed world had just been exposed as a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. They had come here expecting to hold power over me. They were leaving with the knowledge that I held a quiet, devastating power over them, and that I had chosen not to use it for destruction, but for my own liberation. "I believe this meeting is over," I said. "Thank you for coming." As they stood to leave, looking shaken and diminished, I felt not triumph, but a quiet, clean sense of peace. The war was over. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't cried. I hadn't issued threats. I had simply presented the data, and the conclusion was undeniable. The 2 weeks following the confrontation passed in a blur of liberating, purposeful activity. My small apartment, which had for so long felt like a symbol of my struggle for independence, transformed into a command center for my new life. Every box I packed felt like shedding a layer of old, heavy skin. I sold the mismatched furniture I didn't need on Facebook Marketplace, donated bags of clothes that held memories of trying to fit in at family gatherings, and carefully, lovingly, wrapped my treasured telescopes and boxes of books, the true artifacts of my identity. The physical act of decluttering my space felt like I was decluttering my soul. There was no angry fallout from my family, only a deafening, unnerving silence. It was as if our confrontation had created a black hole, sucking all the drama and noise out of our relationship, leaving behind a strange, empty quiet. They didn't call. They didn't text. Chloe sent one clipped, impotent message a few days later. "I don't know what game you're playing, Alara, but you'll regret abandoning your family." I read the message, saw the fear and confusion behind the bluster, and deleted it without replying. I knew it wasn't a game. It was the end of the game, and I was the one walking off the board. The day I left, Sarah came to help me with the final load and to drive my car with me for the first leg of the journey. As we stood in the empty apartment, the rooms echoing with possibility, the afternoon sun slanting through the bare windows, she gave me a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you. It hurts," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You faced the dragon and you won. Now go show the universe what you're made of." My drive to Arizona was a pilgrimage, a 3-day journey across the country that felt like a journey through my own inner landscape. With every mile I put between me and my past, I felt lighter, the immense gravitational pull of my family's expectations weakening with distance. I drove through the sprawling green plains of the Midwest, across the majestic, rugged peaks of the Rockies, and into the vast, sun-baked beauty of the Southwest. The sky opened up above me, a vast, dark canvas that felt less like an object of study and more like a promise. It felt like coming home. My new life began in a small, sun-drenched apartment in Flagstaff, with a ridiculously large balcony and a perfect view of the San Francisco peaks. The air was thin and clear and smelled of pine, a stark contrast to the humid, heavy air of the East Coast. It was perfect for stargazing. The Lowell Observatory, perched on a mesa overlooking the city, was a place of reverence for me. It was a historic landmark of discovery, where Pluto was found, where the expanding nature of the universe was first confirmed. And now, somehow, it was where I belonged. My new colleagues welcomed me, not as Chloe's sister or the quiet one, but as Dr. Vance, the promising researcher with a fresh perspective on dark matter. They were brilliant, passionate, quirky, and collaborative. We would spend hours debating theories, scribbling equations on massive whiteboards, and sharing in the collective, childlike awe of a new image from the Hubble telescope. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood why a faint smudge of light on a photographic plate could make your heart race. The greatest change, however, was the silence. It was a profound, healing peace. The silence of my phone not buzzing with a text from my mother asking for a last-minute favor for Chloe. The silence of my evenings not being filled with a low-grade anxiety about an upcoming family event where I knew I would be judged and minimized. I started hiking on my days off, exploring the rugged beauty of the Arizona landscape, feeling small in the face of the vast geology in the best possible way. I adopted a rescue dog from the local shelter, a scruffy, intelligent terrier mix with one floppy ear, who I named Kepler. He became my constant companion, a warm, living presence in my quiet, peaceful new world. I was building a life that was entirely my own, funded by my own merit, and filled for the first time with my own uncomplicated joy. About a month after I moved, a package arrived in the mail. It was a small, heavy box with my mother's elegant, strained handwriting on the address label. My hand trembled as I opened it, not knowing if it contained an olive branch or another attack. Inside was a dusty, forgotten scrapbook. It was filled with pictures of me as a child, a gap-toothed 7-year-old at my first science fair, a teenager looking with awe through my first telescope, a crayon drawing of the solar system I had made in kindergarten. Tucked inside the front cover was a letter. It was a rambling, disjointed apology from my mother, full of excuses about the pressures they were under, about how they just wanted the best for both of us, about how they didn't understand my world. It didn't acknowledge the depth of the hurt or the years of deliberate neglect, but it was the first crack in their impenetrable armor of denial. I read it, placed it back in the box, and put it on a high shelf in my closet. It was a relic from a past I was moving on from. My new world was forward-looking, focused on the vast, beautiful unknown, not the small, suffocating world I had finally, blessedly left behind. 8 months after I drove into Flagstaff with everything I owned packed into my small sedan, my life was unrecognizable. The quiet peace I had discovered in my first few weeks had blossomed into a vibrant, fulfilling existence that felt more authentic than anything I had ever known. My research at the observatory was proving even more fruitful than I had dared to hope. Working with a team of brilliant, collaborative minds, I had co-authored a paper on a new method for detecting MACOs, massive astrophysical compact halo objects, using subtle distortions in starlight. Our findings were causing a significant stir in the scientific community, and we had been invited to present them at a major international symposium in Geneva, Switzerland, next month. Professionally, I was no longer just a promising student. I was a respected peer, a contributor to the great ongoing conversation of science. The feeling was more validating than any hollow praise from my parents could ever have been. My personal life had found its own steady, happy orbit. My scruffy dog, Kepler, was my constant companion on long hikes through the Coconino National Forest, his boundless energy a perfect antidote to my long hours of quiet concentration. I had built a chosen family of friends from work and the local community, a quirky, intelligent, and deeply kind group of people. We had weekly potlucks where we'd debate everything from string theory to the best local taco truck. We went on camping trips to remote parts of the desert to watch meteor showers, lying on our backs and staring up at a sky so clear it felt like you could fall into it. We supported each other's passions, celebrated each other's victories, and showed up for each other's struggles without judgment or expectation. I was even tentatively starting to date a fellow researcher, a kind, funny geologist named Ben, who found my passion for space as fascinating as I found his for the ancient stories written in rocks. It was a relationship built on mutual respect and shared curiosity, a universe away from the transactional, conditional relationships I had grown up with. News from my old life trickled in occasionally, mostly through my best friend Sarah, who still had some unavoidable contact through mutual acquaintances. The fallout for my parents had been a form of quiet, creeping, natural justice. My father never got his promotion to the executive board. In fact, Mr. Sterling, likely unnerved by the uncomfortable and unexplained connection between his junior executive and the university president, who knew his darkest corporate secret, had subtly sidelined him. Richard Vance was given less important projects, left out of key strategy meetings, and passed over for opportunities. He wasn't fired. That would be too direct. He was being managed out, slowly and professionally, his career quietly stagnating. My mother, whose social standing and self-worth were deeply tied to my father's career trajectory, felt the chill. Invitations to certain exclusive social events dried up. Her world, once so expansive and important in her own mind, had begun to shrink. Chloe, Sarah told me, was struggling the most. Her entire identity was so inextricably wrapped up in being the perfect golden child that she didn't know how to function without me as her less successful foil. With me gone, the family's critical lens had slowly started to turn towards her. Her marriage to Mark was strained. Apparently, he was growing tired of her constant need for external validation and the endless, exhausting drama her family created. Without me there to absorb the negative energy and act as the designated family disappointment, the inherent dysfunction in their system had started to turn inward, like a star collapsing under the weight of its own gravity. They had tried to reestablish contact on their own terms. My mother would send long, rambling emails filled with guilt and passive-aggressive comments about how lonely she was and how family should stick together. My father sent a curt birthday card with a large check inside, a gesture that showed how little he still understood me. I cashed it and immediately donated the full amount to a scholarship fund for women in STEM. I maintained my boundary. I would reply politely but distantly, answering direct questions but never offering up the rich, happy details of my new life. The power dynamic had been irrevocably flipped. They were now the ones orbiting me, desperate for a connection I no longer needed for my own sense of self. One evening, as I was analyzing a new set of data from the telescope, a new email popped up. It was from my mother, but this one was different. It was short, and for the very first time, it was about me, not her. Subject: Your work? Alara, Chloe sent me a link to an online article about your new research paper. I tried to read it. I didn't understand most of the words, but the pictures of the galaxies were beautiful. It sounds like you are doing something important. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long, long time. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't a magical fix for a lifetime of hurt. But it was a start. It was an admission, however small, that my world, the one they had dismissed as a hobby, had value. It was a single sentence, but it represented a seismic shift in our family's universe. I took a deep breath, typed out a simple 2-word reply. Thank you. I hit send, and then I turned my attention back to the stars. My stars, feeling a sense of quiet, profound closure I never thought possible. My journey wasn't about forcing them to look through my telescope and see what I see. It was about having the strength to build that world for myself, whether they ever chose to look or not. As I stood on the viewing deck of the observatory that night, a cool desert breeze on my face, looking up at the infinite, glittering tapestry of the cosmos, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this place of peace. For so many years, I had felt like a small, insignificant moon, trapped in the powerful gravitational pull of a family that demanded I only reflect their light rather than shine my own. I had contorted my orbit, dimmed my own glow, and silenced my own voice, all in a desperate, futile attempt to gain their approval, to feel a warmth that was never meant for me. I had been trying to find my place in a solar system that was fundamentally flawed, a system where only one sun was allowed to burn brightly. The painful, humiliating events of my graduation weren't the cause of my liberation. They were merely the catalyst. They were the final, undeniable piece of data that forced me to accept a conclusion I had been avoiding my whole life. You cannot seek validation from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it. Their definition of worth was a cage, meticulously constructed from expectations of wealth, status, and conventionality. And for my own survival, I had to break free. The universe is full of chaos and beauty, but it also follows a set of immutable laws. The law I had to learn was that my own well-being had to come first. The greatest lesson I learned had nothing to do with complex physics, but with a simple, human truth. Your value is not determined by the recognition you receive from others. It is inherent, like the mass of a star. It exists, constant and unwavering, whether anyone is watching or not. For years, I thought their approval was the prize, but I was wrong. The prize was the work itself. The prize was the passion, the curiosity, the relentless pursuit of knowledge. My vorhibimort was never the secret I held about Mr. Sterling. That was just a tool, a lever. The real secret weapon was the quiet, unshakable knowledge of my own worth, a knowledge I had earned through years of hard work and resilience. It was realizing that the genuine pride in a mentor's eyes, the unconditional love of a true friend, and the deep respect of my peers was a truer, more powerful measure of my impact than a hollow compliment from a parent who saw me as a means to an end. I learned that sometimes the bravest and most compassionate act of love is to set a boundary. It's not about punishment. It's about preservation. You are preserving your own mental health, your own peace, and your own fundamental right to pursue a life that is authentically yours. My new family isn't bound by blood, but by shared passions and mutual respect. They are the constellation I have chosen to be a part of, a group of bright, wonderful people who shine their own light, and in doing so, make the whole sky brighter. My journey was about finding my own, true orbit, far from the toxic gravity of a dysfunctional system. It was about understanding that I am the star of my own universe, and it is my right and my solemn responsibility to cultivate my own light, to burn as brightly as I was meant to. Have you ever had to step away from a family dynamic or a relationship to find your own success or peace? What was the moment you realized you had to change your orbit? I would love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. Sharing our journeys is how we remind each other that we are not alone in the vastness. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more stories about finding your own strength, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded of their own inner light. Remember, you are the star of your own universe. Never let anyone, no matter who they are, dim your light.